Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Today we look at the former Miss Hitler beauty pageant contestant who has been jailed for 3 years for being part of a banned extreme right group. Alice Cutter entered the twisted competition under the name of the Butch and Wild Princess, a reference to a Second World War death camp where 56,545 people were starved to death, executed or died of disease. The 23-year-old exchanged hundreds of messages with members of a hate group, National Action, many were racist and anti-Semitic. Miss Cutter's ex-partner, Mark Jones, a former member of the British National Party's youth wing, was also convicted of being a member and was jailed for 5.5 years. Also convicted of the same offence were Gary Jack from Shard End and 19-year-old Connor Scothern of Nottingham. Mr. Jack was jailed for 4.5 years, while Mr. Scothern was handed an 18-month sentence. Another member of the group, Daniel Ward, 28, from Birmingham, pleaded guilty to a member of the National Action and was jailed for 3 years. The CPS has revealed how officers found Nazi books, knuckle dusters and knives at Miss Cutter and Mr. Jones's house. They also discovered a longbow, KKK images and a Nazi flag and stickers at Mr. Scothern's home. At Miss Cutter's retrial, prosecutors said she had been a central spoke among the organisation's hardcore and entered the pageant to drive recruitment. The group was dubbed a racist, anti-Semitic and homophobic organisation by then Home Secretary Amber Rudd when it was banned in December 2016. During sentencing, Judge Paul Farrer said National Action was the most extreme neo-Nazi organisation to appear in the UK for many decades. Miss Cutter also joked about gassing synagogues and using a Jew's head as a football. She claimed never to be considered herself a member even before the ban, despite attending meetings with group leaders and posing for a Nazi-style salute on the steps of Leeds Town Hall in 2016. Miss Cutter also attended a demo in York in May of 2016. She initially denied attending until footage emerged showing her standing with other masked NA members giving the Nazi salute behind a banner that read "Hitler was right." In one exchange with another National Action member on the day of MP Joe Cox was murdered, referencing the politician, she said, "Rot in hell, bitch." Her ex-partner Mr. Jones was also convicted of being a member. He was described by prosecutors as a leader and strategist and had the nickname Mr. Angry. Mr. Jones, who posted messages on Telegram as Granddaddy Terror, was National Action's London regional organiser and a key designer of the group's propaganda artwork. The 25-year-old accepted in court that he had posed for a photograph during a Nazi salute in Buchenwald's execution route during a trip to Germany in April and May 2016. Mr. Jones was holding a National Action flag while he did. He claimed that he had carried out a salute as a controversial statement, having also taken a selfie in the camp's ovens where thousands of murdered Jews had been incinerated. During his evidence, he told jurors how he had feelings of admiration for Hitler. Before it emerged, he had a special wedding edition of Mein Kampf. Mr. Jones and Miss Cutter, both of Sobury Bridge near Halifax, Yorkshire, described themselves in court as avowed National Socialists, but denied any wrongdoing. However, the jury at Birmingham Crown Court found both unanimously guilty following a retrial lasting 10 weeks after less than 9 hours of deliberations. Despite having split up in the course of the trial, they embraced in the dock before being taken down to the cells. National Action member Gary Jack denied taking a photograph found on his phone of graffiti reading "Gas the Jews," despite repeatedly using anti-Semitic slurs in message and group chat exchanges with other members. The self-confessed Nazi, who said he was against cultural Marxism, told jurors he had considered himself a non-violent liberal in the pre-banned group. The 24-year-old claimed he was not a racist, despite sending a message saying, "Handsworth, first area of Birmingham that needs ethnic cleansing." He said the remark had been tongue-in-cheek. Mr. Jack sent a message to his then-girlfriend in which he talked of threatening to have curb-stomped a black person. In another, he called an Asian man a fucking rat. Mr. Jack had been given a 1-year suspended jail sentence for plastering Birmingham's Aston University campus with racially aggravating National Action stickers in July 2016, some of which read, "Britain is ours, the rest must go." Tried alongside him was 19-year-old Connor Scothern of Bagnall Avenue, Nottingham. Mr. Scothern, who was one time practicing Muslim and Antifa anti-fascist activist before eventually joining National Action, did not give evidence at trial. It was a revolutionary movement and was engaged in racist and political violence. It aims including the creation of a white state in the UK, which would be ethnically cleansed. It prepared violent propaganda and posted messages which said Adolf Hitler was right to murder gays and Jews. On June 16, 2016, Jo Cox, an MP, was stabbed to death in Yorkshire. A member of National Action praised her killer, and the National Action Twitter account did the same thing. After National Action was prescribed, you weren't prepared to disassociate yourselves and carried on as members attending meetings. Jenny Hopkins from the CPS said prosecutors had shown how the group used cybersecurity apps and arranged meetings in different towns. She added they then scanned people attending for hidden mobile phones and listening devices. They communicated through a National Action chat group called the Triple K Mafia, the CPS said. So what are your thoughts about this twisted Nazi group who went on to use public events to try and recruit new members and spread their message? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay safe.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more exciting true crime content. Today we look at a former glamour model who was jailed for life after she admitted stabbing her boyfriend to death when he dumped her by text. Alicia Allen, 29, plunged a knife into former partner Carl Bloxham in a frenzied attack after he sent her a message reading, "It's over." She attacked Carl, 39, with the 5-inch blade when he returned to their home after he had been out for a drink with work colleagues on July 29th last year. Miss Allen called emergency services at 9:52 PM and said, "I've just stabbed my boyfriend. He's dying in front of me. I've just stabbed him. He was calling me names, he was drunk. I've got a mental health problem. I've just grabbed a knife and I've just stabbed him in his heart. I didn't know where I was stabbing him and I've just stabbed him to death." Miss Allen gave her address to the operator and added, "He's dead. His eyes are open and he's dead. He's not moving and I stabbed him." One neighbour told police they heard loud thumping noises coming from the flat, as well as Miss Allen shouting, doors slamming and their dog barking. Another resident heard Miss Allen shouting, "Carl, please don't leave me," and a third heard a male voice shouting, "Stop, you're hurting me." When police arrived at the flat in Hucknall Notts, they found Carl lying on the floor with Miss Allen kneeling close to his head, covered in blood. Paramedics tried to save the father of two's life for 35 minutes, but he was pronounced dead in hospital later that night. The court heard Miss Allen, who has previous convictions for assaulting police and for a drunken rampage on an aeroplane, had started a relationship with Carl in 2011, but it was volatile and unpredictable, almost from the outset. Today, the ex-model admitted murder at Nottingham Crown Court and was sentenced to serve a minimum term of 14 years behind bars. Judge Gregory Dickinson QC said, "I'm absolutely sure you picked up a knife and used it because you were angry because Mr. Bloxham decided to leave you." Carl's sister, Kylie, said in a victim impact statement that, "I miss him and I regret that I did not tell him enough that I loved him." Mr. Bloxham's father, Ted, also said he lost his son and his best friend. He added, "We have a life sentence ourselves that will never go away." Peter Joyce QC defending said that Miss Allen had an emotionally unstable alcohol disorder, bulimia and anorexia, and had all 5 characteristics for emotionally unstable personality disorder. He said at the time of the offence she was suffering from a number of recognised medical conditions. It is plain she was utterly stricken by remorse for what she had done. In September 2008, Miss Allen was spared jail after she forced a British Airways jet to make an emergency landing after downing a cocktail of Bacardi, gin and antidepressants. The glamour model, then aged 21, lashed out at a cabin crew after losing her bag in the plane's toilet during the 3-hour flight from Tirana. Miss Allen was also kicking and flailing her arms at anyone who tried to help her and even crawled along the floor towards the cockpit and main exit. She also spat at a policeman as he tried to restrain her after the plane was given priority landing spot at Gatwick Airport. Judge Charles Kemp gave her a suspended sentence and told her, "Your conduct on that plane was an absolute disgrace and an outrageous in terms of the interference with cabin crew who have responsible jobs to carry out." Miss Allen was also spared jail in November 2008 when she spat in the faces of 2 police officers who were forced to have vaccinations for hepatitis after it landed in their mouths. But what do you think about Miss Allen's crime? Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and a share, and leave any thoughts or suggestions you have in the comments section. We love to read through them all. And if you're new but enjoy UK true crime content, then subscribe to see when our newest video releases. And as always, stay safe.
A serial killer, psychopath and pathological liar. Joanna Dennehy described herself as a monster with a Moorish taste for blood.
She was charged with 1 murder and the 2 attempted murders.
Okay, attempted and murder. Attempted murder and murder. Good work. And a big fat black dog.
In March 2013, the quiet English town of Peterborough was shaken by a shocking series of murders. Over the course of 10 days, 3 local men were viciously stabbed to death and left discarded in the watery ditches on the outskirts of the town. Dubbed the Peterborough Ditch Murders by the media, these killings appeared to be motiveless and random acts of savagery. Yet they were all committed by the same perpetrator, an unassuming young woman named Joanna Dennehy. Miss Dennehy's spree of violence highlighted that women are capable of crimes just as chilling as their male counterparts. Her actions defied stereotypes about the fairer sex, and she joined the ranks of Britain's most notorious female serial killers. This intelligent yet emotionally disturbed killer specifically targeted men to satisfy her sadistic urges. After her arrest, she boasted that she found the murder Moorish and fun. The Peterborough Ditch Murders provide a case study of a psychopathic mind. Miss Dennehy possesses the classic traits: lack of empathy, remorse, guilt, and emotional depth. Her story reveals the danger posed by those unable to feel compassion for others, but it also prompts difficult questions about how such individuals can be identified and stopped before it's too late. This story will delve into the background, motives, and psychology behind Miss Dennehy's 10 days of murder. It will reconstruct the police manhunt which eventually brought her to justice. More importantly, it will tell the stories of the victims whose lives were so brutally cut short by this callous killer. Their names must not be forgotten as we try to comprehend how and why such shocking crimes could unfold in an otherwise peaceful English town. The morning of March the 29th, 2013 began like any other for a resident of Peterborough, a peaceful English town in Cambridgeshire. But by nightfall, the community would be rocked by the discovery of a brutal murder on its outskirts. This was only the first sign of horror that had been unfolding in the mists over the past 10 days at the hands of Joanna Dennehy. Miss Dennehy's first victim, Lucas Slabowski, had been killed 8 days earlier. The 31-year-old Polish national had met Miss Dennehy just days before his murder. She had nicknamed him her expectant victim and lured him to a property with the promise of sexual favours. Once there, she mercilessly drove a pocket knife into his heart before storing his lifeless body in a wheel bin, leaving behind a wife and 2 children. Her next target was to be housemate John Chapman, a 56-year-old Falklands veteran who lived in the same rundown bedsit as Miss Dennehy in Peterborough. High on drink and drugs, on the evening of March the 29th, he was ruthlessly stabbed in the neck and chest as Miss Dennehy told an accomplice, "Oops, I've done it again." His body was callously dumped in a ditch on the outskirts of the town. That same evening, Miss Dennehy murdered her 3rd victim, her landlord and lover, 48-year-old Kevin Lee. She stabbed him in the heart and dressed his corpse in a sequin black dress before leaving it to rot in Newborough. Mr. Lee had considered Miss Dennehy a close friend as well as a lover, utterly oblivious to the danger she posed. Over the course of 10 days, Miss Dennehy had murdered 3 men who trusted her, each stabbed repeatedly in a ferocious, sustained attack. Her victims had been horrifically violated and discarded like trash. But even after this vicious killing spree, Miss Dennehy's bloodlust had not been sated. 2 more men would soon be fighting for their lives against the blade of this remorseless killer. As the news spread of the bodies discovered in the ditches outside Peterborough, police launched a frantic nationwide manhunt to find their killer. The 3 victims, Lucas Slabowski, John Chapman and Kevin Lee, appeared to have been randomly targeted, leaving detectives few leads. But diligent police work would eventually trace the footsteps of Joanna Dennehy's vicious spree across Britain's highways. Officers meticulously gathered CCTV footage tracking Miss Dennehy's movement over the next 10 days, when she stabbed 5 men, 3 fatally. Cameras caught her driving her Vauxhall Astra with accomplice Gary Stretch, who used to be known as Gary Richards, by her side. Miss Dennehy at the wheel. They crisscrossed the country roads of East Anglia to deposit her victims where no one could find them. The biggest break came when Miss Dennehy's car was spotted on CCTV heading west. She had travelled 140 miles away to the city of Hereford, suggesting her killing spree was far from over. Detectives descended upon the city, warning the local populace to be vigilant. Their fears proved justified when 2 dog walkers were randomly attacked and stabbed in separate incidences. Both seriously injured, both men miraculously survived. Witness descriptions of a crazed young woman wielding a knife led police to finally close in on Miss Dennehy. After going to ground for several days amongst the network of narrow Hereford streets, she and her accomplice, Mr. Stretch, were arrested by armed officers. Found in the car was John Chapman's dog, Bonnie, taken by Miss Dennehy after his murder. The pet was traumatised but still alive, having been forced to ride alongside Mr. Chapman's lifeless corpse. With Miss Dennehy finally in custody, police could begin to unravel the full extent of her depraved killing spree. But her lack of remorse, or even a clear motive, would continue to shock and confuse investigators. The urgent manhunt had succeeded in capturing a killer with a lust for blood before she could claim any further lives. Yet questions remained about what could drive a young British woman to carry out such a brutal and indiscriminate violence against strangers she had only just met. The police had caught her, but understanding her would prove to be far more difficult. As details emerged about Johanna Dennehy's early life, they revealed a childhood filled with disturbing warning signs of what was to come. Miss Dennehy grew up in the Herefordshire town of Harpenden, close to St Albans. Her father, Kevin, worked in security, and her mother, Kathleen, was a shop assistant. On the surface, it appeared an ordinary lower middle class household. Yet, even as a young girl, Miss Dennehy showed indications of abnormal psychology. She demonstrated a cruel streak, seemingly to enjoy inflicting suffering on others. Neighbours recalled her torturing insects and bullying other children. As a teen, she became increasingly disruptive and aggressive. At the age of 15, Miss Dennehy ran away from home without warning, severing ties with her family. She began drifting between temporary jobs and romantic relationships, often moving across the country. It was a pattern of transience that would continue into adulthood. Those who knew Miss Dennehy described her as manipulative and deceitful in how she interacted with others. She had a chameleon-like ability to change her persona to get what she wanted, before abandoning people once their usefulness had faded. Her parents likened her to a snake shredding its skin. Miss Dennehy went on to have 2 children from different fathers, but showed minimal maternal instincts. She continued abusing drugs and alcohol, and her life became increasingly unstable. By the time she committed her infamous murders at the age of 30, any semblance of a normal existence had long since disappeared. After her crimes, Miss Dennehy's parents spoke of their disbelief at the monster she had become. They believed the kind, sensitive girl they had lovingly raised had disappeared forever once she ran away from home. But the seeds of Miss Dennehy's destructive compulsions had perhaps always been there, waiting to fully bloom once the last restraints of family were severed. After her arrest, Johanna Dennehy underwent extensive psychiatric analysis to determine what drove her brutal actions. These sessions with leading experts provided chilling insights into her abnormal psychology and utter lack of normal human emotions. Miss Dennehy was diagnosed with several severe personality disorders, which obliterated her ability to feel empathy or remorse. The first was psychotherapy, which meant she pursued her desires without regard for others and felt no guilt for the damage left in her wake. Psychopaths are skilled at manipulating people but are unable to form real emotional connections. Every relationship is transactional to them. Miss Dennehy also exhibited antisocial personality disorder. Sufferers tend to violate social norms without concern for consequences. They disregard the law, lie compulsively, and feel no obligation towards others. Miss Dennehy's transient lifestyle and estrangement from her family were hallmarks of this disorder. In addition, she had borderline personality disorder marked by unstable moods, turbulent relationships, impulsivity, and fear of abandonment. Her drastic suicide attempts with other inmates displayed the chaotic emotional patterns of this illness. Most chillingly, Miss Dennehy showed signs of paraphilia sadomasochism. This meant she derived intense sexual excitement from both inflicting and receiving pain and humiliation, causing fear and suffering satisfied her cruel sadistic desires. Miss Dennehy killed for gratification, relishing the control she exerted over her helpless victims in their final moments. Psychiatrists concluded that Miss Dennehy possessed an extreme form of psychopathology. Her combined disorders created the perfect storm to produce a remorseless killer. She lacked a conscience and the rich inner world most of us possess. There was a yawning emptiness inside Miss Dennehy that she attempted to fill with violence. Her crimes enacted the fantasies of a damaged mind. The experts who analysed Miss Dennehy agreed she had no possibility of being cured. Her conditions were lifelong and untreatable. Medication could not instill a conscience or empathy where none existed. The diagnosis confirmed that Miss Dennehy felt no remorse because mentally she was incapable of it. They provided insights but could not fully explain the evolution of a woman who derived deep fulfillment for murder. In November 2013, Joanna Dennehy was brought before the court to answer for her shocking crimes. By this point, her guilt was in no doubt. Miss Dennehy had already confessed to 3 murders and 2 attempted murders, yet her continued lack of remorse during the trial proceedings would disturb both judge and jury. Miss Dennehy pleaded guilty to all indictments, but seemed to revel in her day at court. She mocked psychiatrists who attempted to analyse her, and flirted openly with accomplice Gary Stretch. "I've pleaded guilty, and that's that," she arrogantly told the judge when questioned. Victim impact statements from grieving family members left Miss Dennehy yawning in the dock. She showed neither compassion nor any flicker of guilt for the lives she had destroyed. A smirking Miss Dennehy seemed to relish in being the centre of attention. The trial confirmed chilling details of Miss Dennehy's crimes. She had targeted her victims purely for sadistic gratification, comparing herself to Bonnie and Clyde. Afterwards, she callously disposed of the bodies in remote ditches. Miss Dennehy's lack of remorse alarmed psychiatric experts called in to assess her twisted psyche. Justice was finally served in February 2014 when Mr. Justice Spencer sentenced Miss Dennehy to life imprisonment at the Old Bailey. He recommended she should never be released, branding her a cruel, calculated serial killer who knew exactly what she was doing. Miss Dennehy merely laughed as the judge detailed her sadistic love for spilling blood and how she gained sexual pleasure from harming others. He concluded this dangerous psychopath could never be rehabilitated. She became the 3rd woman in British history to receive a whole life term. The sentence fittingly punished Miss Dennehy's horrific crimes and brought relief to traumatised family members. But for investigators and criminal experts, many questions remained unanswered. What could have shaped such a cold-hearted killer to devoid of such empathy and remorse? And was Miss Dennehy born a monster or created by the world around her? Joanna Dennehy's cruel crimes demanded that she be removed from society and imprisoned for public safety, but her continued malevolent behaviour behind bars showed that incarceration had done nothing to reform this psychopathic killer. After her sentencing in 2014, Miss Dennehy was sent to HMP Bronzefield in Surrey. Almost immediately, she began plotting a daring escape. Her plan involved murdering a female prison officer and using the severed fingers to fool the biometric entry system. The plot was only foiled when guards found the plan scribbled in Miss Dennehy's diary. Such was the danger Miss Dennehy posed that she was kept in solitary confinement for over 2 years. During this isolation, she made several suicide attempts and self-harmed regularly. Miss Dennehy later sued the prison system for human rights breaches over her confinement conditions. Miss Dennehy also made chilling threats against other notorious inmates. When serial killer Rose West was temporarily moved to HMP Bronzefield, Miss Dennehy allegedly vowed to murder her in order to become the top dog. Terrified prison staff quickly had Miss West transferred to another facility. Joanna Dennehy's vicious killing spree, lasting just 10 days, left scars on the British psyche that continue to linger. Her crimes highlighted flaws in the system meant to identify such dangers and tragically cut short the lives of 5 men. The families of her 3 murder victims were left devastated by Miss Dennehy's sadistic brutality. Lucas Slabowski's wife and 2 young daughters were suddenly deprived of a loving husband and father. The Falklands veteran John Chapman and landlord Kevin Lee also left behind grieving relatives. Miss Dennehy's parents spoke of lasting trauma at how their daughter had become a remorseless killer. They believe the happy, caring girl they raised was forever lost once she ran away at age 16. Her father says he will never forgive Miss Dennehy for the heartbreak she has caused. Questions were raised about why probation services had not done more whilst monitoring Miss Dennehy for previous offences. She had already shown violence, yet there were no robust measures to intervene in her downward spiral into murder. The case also highlighted how violent psychopathic women remain far rarer than their male counterparts. Some argue Miss Dennehy deserves greater prominence alongside infamous British female killers like Myra Hindley and Rosemary West. Academics continue trying to unravel Miss Dennehy's complex and disturbing psychology to understand what can lead to such brutal crimes. But for criminologists, no theoretical insights can undo the horrific reality of what her victims suffered. Joanna Dennehy's 10 days of violence shook the nation and left untold damage in their wake. Her name will go down in the annals of infamy beside history's most reviled killers. Yet the loved ones of those she so mercilessly killed will be remembered by their family as far more than just victims of a notorious murderer. The grim story of Joanna Dennehy's murderous rampage leaves us with as many questions as answers. What could have caused a young woman to morph into a cold-blooded killer who took such pleasure in inflicting pain and ending lives? Was Miss Dennehy always destined to become a murderer due to her innate psychology? Or did social failings allow her violent urges to flourish unchecked? Perhaps we will never fully understand what created this monster, but we owe it to Miss Dennehy's victims to search for such insight. Only by examining the factors that produce such warped individuals can we hope to prevent future tragedies. It is tempting to dismiss Miss Dennehy as an anomaly, a rare female psychopath not representative of her gender, but we must be vigilant against those who exhibit the warning signs. Early intervention may prevent them from descending into depravity and horror. Miss Dennehy's crimes highlight that women are equally capable of the most chilling evil. Her victims' suffering proves that brutality does not discriminate by sex. We must discard outdated assumptions that females are incapable of merciless violence. As you reflect on this disturbing case, consider the following. What can be done to identify psychopathic traits in use before it's too late? How can we address the failures in social services and law enforcement that allowed Miss Dennehy's spree? What does Miss Dennehy's pathological lack of empathy and remorse tell us about human nature? While justice has been served, has society truly learnt the lesson from these chilling crimes? Though she remains unrepentant, we must strive to do better as a society. If evil like Miss Dennehy still lurks in our midst, we are responsible for rooting it out. The souls she stole deserve nothing less. In 2018, Miss Dennehy announced her intention to marry girlfriend and fellow prisoner Hayley Palmer, but despite Miss Palmer's release in 2021, the wedding never went ahead. Miss Dennehy continued her relationship with Miss Palmer for some years before it broke down. Throughout her incarceration, Miss Dennehy has remained defiant and unrepentant about her crimes. She passes time baking with fellow inmates, but refuses to cooperate with psychologists. Now nearing 40 years old, she seems destined to remain in prison for the rest of her natural life. For the families of Miss Dennehy's victims, her imprisonment provides a measure of justice and protects others from harm, but they continue living with the pain of their loss, while the killer herself feels no such heartache over the lives she so cruelly stole.
A serial killer, psychopath and pathological liar. Joanna Dennehy described herself as a monster with a Moorish taste for blood. When earlier this year Dennehy was given a whole life sentence, she joined the ranks of Rosemary West and Myra Hindley as one of Britain's most infamous female murderers. Matthew's story of how she was caught contains some strong language.
It was like a river of blood.
She just kept coming for me.
The most dangerous of people, you can't predict what they're going to do.
The story of Joanna Dennehy, the serial killer, is a dark and deeply disturbing one. It begins with a missing man and ends with 3 dead, their bodies dumped in ditches, and 2 others fighting for their lives. But how did this mother of 2 become a cold-blooded killer who murdered men for fun? Dennehy grew up in Hertfordshire with her parents and younger sister. Her childhood seems to have been comfortable and ordinary. But in a twisted fantasy, she claimed she'd been abused as a child and even that she'd killed her father.
She is obsessed, fascinated by the ability one human has to actually snuff out the life of another.
But she wouldn't be satisfied with just the fantasy of murder. On Friday the 29th of March last year, Peterborough landlord Kevin Lee went missing. He was a 48-year-old husband with 2 children. Within hours of his family contacting the police, a car was discovered on fire. Checks quickly revealed it was his.
His car, found as it was ablaze, he not with it, was a particular interest to me, that there was obviously something underlying that that was stopping him from being in contact with his family. That raised the level of suspicion that I was dealing with more than the missing person inquiry.
Their worst fears were soon realised. The body of Kevin Lee was found in a ditch. He'd been repeatedly stabbed in the chest, including through the heart. In a final act of humiliation, he was wearing a black sequin dress pulled up above his waist. The missing person case was now a murder investigation.
You're standing literally in the middle of a field. You realise you've got no CCTV, you've got no witnesses. It was evident to me that the answer would be around the people in Kevin's life, and Joanne Dennehy was one of them. There was a suspicion that Kevin was having more than a friendly relationship with Joanna.
Dennehy lived in a shared house in Peterborough, owned by Kevin. She seemed to have a power and influence over some men. They would become obsessed and fascinated by her. Police decided to bring her in for questioning.
It was very evident very quickly that she was making herself very, very hard to find.
And she wasn't alone. Detectives linked her to longtime friend, 7'3" tall Gary Stretch.
It was clear to me that Dennehy and Stretch were involved in Kevin's death. And it was at that point that I took the difficult decision to put both their photographs into the media. Dennehy and Stretch together were a particularly dangerous combination.
The pair got a thrill from their status, bragging they were like Bonnie and Clyde.
Take a picture of me.
They took these pictures while on the run. Officers from forces across the UK were now looking for them, and the police were about to get a major breakthrough.
A detective in Norfolk was reviewing a theft at a petrol station and gave me that critical missing link, the registration number of a green Vauxhall Astra. Well, that was the absolute golden nugget.
The car was traced to Hereford, 140 miles away, an area Stretch had links with. But by now, Dennehy had formed a sick plan.
I want my fun.
This time, to murder at random.
I felt a thump in the back of my shoulder. So just turned around and there was this girl. She said, I want to hurt you. I want to fucking kill you. Kicked her. At least twice. Punched her. Made no effect. She just kept coming.
Dennehy left him for dead, but she hadn't satisfied her lust for blood. Within 20 minutes, she struck again. This time the attack was even more savage.
I mean, the first thought I can remember was, well, this is it, you know, this is the day that I die. I mean, I just couldn't believe that I would survive, because it was like a river of blood.
She was now taking more risks, attacking in broad daylight, but with multiple 999 calls reporting what she'd done, the police were closing in.
At the very least in Cambridgeshire, we could show an association between Kevin and Joanna, and this was completely off the scale.
Just 19 minutes after John Rogers was stabbed, police had caught Dennehy.
She was arrested by officers in Hereford, was completely calm, offered no resistance, and even offered them the knife that she had carried out the attack with.
Stretch wasn't in the car, but he was arrested within an hour. She was charged with 1 murder and the 2 attempted murders.
Attempted and murder. Attempted murder and murder. Good work. A big fat black dog.
She's facing an inevitable fate. The cavalier, defiant behaviour that we see in the footage is a desperate last attempt to avoid the consequences, not to have to face up to that.
But there were further horrors to come. 2 more bodies were found, not far from Kevin Lee's.
The sense of shock that went through the incident room when I relayed that to my team was palpable. And it was, I guess, that critical moment where we all realised that we were dealing with something extraordinary now.
Łukasz Slabozewski would turn out to have been Dennehy's first victim. Originally from Poland, the 31-year-old had only known her for a few days. He was stabbed once through the heart. The second body in the ditch, and also Dennehy's second victim, was 56-year-old John Chapman. He was murdered at the house he shared with her. She stabbed him once in the neck and 5 times in the chest, including again through the heart.
She moves on from a simple, straightforward murder style to one which is much more frenzied. She's less focused on the ultimate destruction of the individual. She's done that, she's experienced that, and she's liberated now to express her full sadistic desires.
Only Dennehy knows exactly why she killed. During 14 hours of police interviews, she refused to cooperate.
Did you murder Lushkash Slavijeski?
No comment.
Did you murder Kevin Lee?
No comment.
Did you murder John Chapman?
No comment.
But while awaiting trial, she surprised everyone, including her own legal team, by pleading guilty. At the Old Bailey, she laughed, joked and swore in court as she became only the third woman to be given a whole life term.
She's in company of Hindley and West as female serial killers. The nature of her crimes are very different, but just as shocking.
She's the only female serial killer I can think of, other than Rose West, who has committed the crimes purely for their own sake, for their own sadistic thrill.
Actually, what you've got is probably the most dangerous of people. You can't predict what they're going to do. And it's absolutely right that she will die in prison.
It's a staggering situation. There's the why. Was any more understood about the why?
No, we don't, partly because of that late guilty plea. Her sister said it was all about Dennehy trying to control the trial situation. We know she had a pretty normal childhood, doting parents, doing well at school, but by 15 she was beginning to go off the rails. Drink, skunk cannabis, she left home, but nothing that fully explains that descent into chaos. I mean, by the end, she certainly loved the notoriety. She's said to have danced around the television when she saw herself in news reports. I spoke to one criminologist who suggested perhaps once the spotlight faded, she'd offer up some sort of explanation, because rather like in the way of the Moors murderer, to keep the focus on here, Ian Brady, control is everything, and the why is the one thing they control.
Just briefly, psychologists, the police, did they say she would have gone on killing?
Oh, undoubtedly. They think the number of attacks would have increased, also the level of violence would have increased. Once she crossed that line, all she wanted to do was kill. There are only two positive. One, the police caught her so quickly. The other is that Joanna Dennehy will spend every day of the rest of her life in a prison cell.
Matthew, thank you. Let's go to Martin now.
Dennehy wasn't alone. 7'3" Gary Stretch was her driver and accomplice. Here they are, holding hands at Strensham Services on the M5. It's just before 9 in the morning on April the 2nd, and the first sign, the pair were heading west. Stretch had contacts in the small Herefordshire town of Kington. For local man Mark Lloyd, it was a day he'll never forget.
I've walked into the front room and Gary's just stood there basically by the balcony door, staring at me, and as soon as I walked in I thought, what the hell am I going to do now? And then, but whilst I'm thinking that, Joe's walked in behind me, come right in front of me, pulled the knife out, still covered in blood and skin, and said, "You must be Mark, you must be Barry. Gary's my driver, he does the disposing of the bodies. I've just killed 3 people and I want to do some more."
Was he under her control?
You'd like to say that he was under control. Oh, he did what she asked, but he still did it with free will. There was no threats to his life. I mean, you know what I mean? She wasn't holding a knife to his blade or his belly or anything. He just wanted to please Joe.
By 3:30 they were in Hereford. More CCTV pictures showed Dennehy and Mark Lloyd buying tobacco. Still armed, she sticks close to him in the shop.
We've walked into the shop. I'm instantly thinking that she's going to mug the girl behind her because the till was already open. And then she's basically asked the girl to turn around and comment on the fact she's got a very nice backside. I kind of felt, okay, we got through that one. I gave him money over for the cigarettes. We come back in the car. What I had to do, I had to convince these two I was on their side, and all they're saying is I'm inside. I was thinking, I need to get you caught. How do I get you caught? How do I get you caught? But the next man's got to have a dog. The next man's got to have a dog.
Initial reports to the police were sketchy, but for one crucial detail about the attacker from the victim himself.
What was key was the piece of information that Mr. Bereza was able to give us, and that was the fact that Joanna Dennehy had this distinctive tattoo on her cheek. Officers very quickly made the association between the earlier request from Cambridgeshire.
as Superintendent Ivan Powell briefs his officers on the ground about the two suspects, trauma doctor Nick Crombie is already flying to the stabbing scene in the air ambulance when a call comes in that there'd been another one.
To get multiple casualties over a very short period of time, the anxiety was very much that this would turn into a what we call a marauding event, where someone is going around repeatedly attacking more and more people, such that it starts to overwhelm the services available.
The two attacks were 9 minutes and only a few streets apart. 56-year-old John Rogers had been walking his dog and fitted the profile Dennehy wanted.
Joe said, yeah, he'll do. And Gary's parked up by a bus stop. She's walked straight up to him with the bloke's got his back turned to it and just literally launched into it.
I suddenly felt what I thought was a really heavy punch in the small of my back. And when I turned round, I saw this woman and she just kept stabbing me in the chest.
And this man did try fighting back, but it was a frenzy.
Could you hear anything? Could you hear what was going on? Did you hear what she was saying?
She was just saying, more, got to do some more, got to do some more.
She also said, oh look, you're bleeding, I'd better do some more. I think I said, just leave me alone please, please leave me alone. But she didn't, she just carried on.
Both men were left for dead, Mr. Rogers with almost 40 stab wounds. Dennehy even took his dog as a trophy. They drove off from Golden Post and parked up in an area of Hereford known as the Oval.
By the time Dennehy, Stretch and Lloyd had reached here, Superintendent Powell had every man on the ground he could muster, and in the end, she didn't make it that difficult for them.
In fact, she casually went for a walk with Mr. Rogers' dog, giving both Gary Stretch and Mark Lloyd the chance to bail out. At 4:10, armed police found her sitting alone in the car. She was arrested without a struggle, Mark Lloyd soon after.
Because she got arrested and taken into the custody suite with me. The last thing I remember Joe singing was, they've asked her, have you got anything to say, Joanne Dennehy? And she's just broken into a tap dance and started singing in the rain. That's the last I saw of Joe.
At 5:45 p.m, Stretch gave himself up to armed officers in Elmley Village, 16 miles away. Dennehy's violent rampage was over half an hour after it began, but it was several days before Mr. Berezza and Mr. Rogers were out of danger.
It's changed my outlook a little bit in that, you know, I think you've got to make everything of every day, because you don't know. You could wake up in the morning and get run down by a bus, you know, you don't know what's around the corner. So I try to make the best of every day.
Considering their horrific injuries, both men have made a remarkable recovery. Police, though, are still working to calm the fears Joanna Dennehy brought to Hereford.
The sense that the investigation team have is that had Joanna Dennehy not been arrested when she was, she would have gone on to commit a further offence against somebody in the street in Hereford.
Mark Lloyd still has nightmares about the serial killer.
And this whole episode just sounds like something out of some movie, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't sleep at night anymore anyway. But it's just, I'm just glad Joe went guilty, because I wasn't looking forward to seeing her in court.
After such violence, Dennehy appeared calm in custody. She's since been diagnosed with a psychotic personality disorder and admitted the 3 Peterborough murders and the Hereford stabbing spree. Stretch always denied being her willing accomplice, but the jury found him guilty of attempted murder.
Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Today we're going to take a look at the case of the 40 Elephants, or the 40 Thieves Gang, which were a 19th to 20th century all-female London crime syndicate who specialised in shoplifting. The gang was notable for its longevity and its skill in avoiding police detection. The 40 Thieves operated from Elephant and Castle in the London area, and they were allied with the Elephant and Castle mob led by the MacDonald brothers. They raided quality stores in the West End of London and ranged all over the country. The gang was also known to masquerade as housewives for wealthy families before ransacking their homes, often using false references. They were in existence from at least 1873 to the 1950s, with some indications that they may have existed until the late 18th century. During the early 20th century, the gang was led by Alice Diamond, known variously as the Queen of the 40 Thieves, and as Diamond Annie, and as a friend of Maggie Hill, sister of the gangster Billy Hill. Their heyday was in the inner war period, when the gang raided on a large scale, not only on the West End of London, but also in other major shopping centres across the country. They also forced smaller gangs to pay a tribute on what they had stolen and would punish criminals who did not obey their rules. The gang had its own set of rules and demanded loyalty from its members, and in others of their supply and distribution network. Alice Diamond ruled with absolute authority, with the cooperation of Maggie Hill, Gertrude Scully, the Partridge Sisters, and many others. Over 70 direct members of the gang, operating in the 1920s and 1930s, have been identified. Reports that the gang collapsed when their leaders were jailed for the 1925 Battle of Lambeth were incorrect. The gang was still in existence after World War II, as new family members replaced the old hands. They were often said to be able to meet equal numbers of men in battle, and were admired by their male counterparts in the Elephant Gang for their organisation and expertise. One member of the gang, Lillian Goldstein, or Nee Kendall, was known to the police as the bobbed-haired bandit, the lover of Elephant Gang associate Ruby Sparks, and driver on his smash-and-grab raids. It is unclear how long the gang operated. The earliest mention of the gang in the newspaper dates to 1873, but police records from London indicate that the female shoplifters had been active in the area since the late 18th century. The original gang members wore women's clothing, which was modified to include hidden pockets. They could hide their loot in their coats, cummerbunds, muffs, skirts, bloomers and hats. They raided large stores in the West End of London. Due to the prudish attitude of the era, female customers were afforded privacy from the store staff, giving female shoplifters the opportunity to escape notice. The gang stole goods worth thousands of pounds. The female gang members earned enough money to financially support their male spouses. The spouses in question included both idle men who lounged at home and inmates of the British prison system. The gang eventually became well known to the area, and especially with the high-class shops which they typically targeted. Their mere presence would cause panic, eliminating the secrecy for requirement in their activities. Their response to this challenge was to expand their activities from London to other British towns, where they were much less known. They targeted rural areas and seaside towns. During the 20th century, the gang modernised their activities. They invested in fast cars to transport their loot, and to use as getaway vehicles which they could outrun the police. The loot was transferred through the British railway system. The members used the trains to travel to a town and deposited their empty suitcases at the railway stations. During their return trip, the suitcases were filled with stolen goods. Besides shoplifting, the gang developed sidelines such as looting houses and blackmailing individuals. Gang members used false reference letters to get hired as maids and then rob the houses of their employers. They also managed to seduce men into brief affairs and then blackmailed them with threats of ruining their reputations. By the 1920s, the gang members started imitating the so-called Bright Young Things group, whose exploits appeared in popular press. The gang members led extravagant and decadent lifestyles by imitating the exploits of the era's movie stars and flappers. Part of their earnings was used to finance party events and spend lavishly at clubs, pubs and restaurants which the gang members frequented. The gang was particularly territorial of their turf. Other shoplifters who stole from their shops on their turf were forced to pay the gang a percentage of their takings. If the intruder refused to pay, the gang arranged beatings and kidnappings for the offenders until the payment was received. While various gang members were arrested and convicted at times, their prison sentences tended to be short. They could be sentenced to either 12 months or penal labour of 3 years of incarceration. Once released, they returned back to the gang. Several members remained with the gang for a relatively long time. Gang member known as Ada Wellman was initially arrested in 1921 and was still with the gang and arrested for another offence in 1939. While the gang members often stole clothing items, they typically did not wear the stolen clothes. Their loot was distributed to a network of fences, street market traders and pawnbrokers. Part of the stolen clothing items were sold to clothing stores, which simply replaced the labels and modified their designs. Some of the fences associated with the gang were also arrested, but could not be convicted. Ada McDonald was arrested and suspected of offence in 1910. She used the ledgers of a suspected authenticity to convince the authorities that the goods in her possession were the products of a legitimate financial transaction. Jane Durrell, another suspected fence, and her common-law husband Jim Bullock were both placed on trial in 1911. The jury decided that the police evidence against them was insufficient and they were acquitted of the charges and released. One afternoon in 1915, a group of elegantly dressed women arrived in hired cars at the prestigious Selfridges department store in London. They were dressed in furs, jewels and expensive dresses, and the staff treated them as if they would any upscale female customer. Given the error's prudish ways, this meant ignoring the women in order to allow them to try on clothes in privacy. It was only after the women had left that the staff realised these women had shoplifted a fortune's worth of gems, furs and clothing. These were no ordinary shoppers. They were members of London's first documented all-female gang, the 40 Elephants, also known as the 40 Thieves. The 40 Elephants were established in the 1870s when the female thieves of South London organised to remove themselves from the control of the male-dominated Elephant and Castle mob. The men's gang had occasionally worked with women as accomplices, but the smaller role meant that smaller cut of earnings were given out. Schism was overseen by the artist model and expert thief named Mary Carr, who became the queen of the new gang. The Elephant and Castle gangsters agreed to provide protection and occasional assistance to the 40 Elephants in an exchange for a portion of their earnings. Miss Carr's expertise was in hoisting, stealing goods, then reselling them through fences. The gang's goal was never to retain the items they had stolen, but to become rich by selling them to third parties. Acquired most their goods through shoplifting, seducing and blackmailing influential men, and conning their way into jobs as housemaids, only to loot the homes where they worked. The gang focused primarily on the theft of gems, jewellery, furs and fashion items. With the money they made through resale, purchased even more expensive items for themselves, never wearing what they had stolen. Alice Diamond, an even more formidable woman, succeeded Miss Carr as the Queen in 1916. Miss Diamond had been a skilled shoplifter since her childhood. She was known to wear diamond rings as a makeshift brass knuckle. This was her way of displaying her love for glamour and her love for violence. She was striking, powerful, and stood at 5'9", in a time where the average man was probably about 5'6". The other thieves, most of whom were much older, fell in line behind her leadership skills and vision. She intuitively knew the effect of styling could have on their chances for success. And under her influence, the 40 Elephants became known for their decadent excess and trendy, expensive attire. Media attention increased along with their coffers. Miss Diamond effectively reorganised the gang by splitting them into separate cells. This allowed for simultaneous robberies to occur in various parts of the city, dividing the police's attention and catching shopkeepers by surprise. She created a Hoisters Code, a code of conduct that outlined the democratic manner in which the gang had operated, including provisos detailing the equal division of money from the heist jobs, an expectation for the gang to care for family members of an imprisoned thief, and for the women to always provide alibis for each other. Miss Diamond also codified an expectation of absolute loyalty, and it was punishable by ridicule or beating when disobeyed. While her guidelines were strictly enforced, so too were a number of other rules ensuring the smooth operation of the criminal syndicate, such as one forbidding theft or money or boyfriends among the members. The group's shared treasury was used to assist members in trouble and pay for lawyers, as well as to fund extravagant lifestyles. Members in the gang were akin to being part of a union with unusually fair benefits for all. Miss Diamond was ruthless in protecting her gang's territory. Should an outsider steal from a shop in their area. They demanded that the interloper pay a percentage of their taking. If an offender refused, the gang would beat and sometimes kidnap until they agreed to pay the terms. The media's portrayal of the 40 Elephants continued to expand their legend, and their enemies continued to underestimate them. The newspapers wrote about Miss Diamond and her gang as gorgeous party girls, but the women were just as brutal as other street gangs. Glamour was both a goal and a smokescreen for the 40 Elephants, through which they created their own thrilling world of fashion, money and fame. In the 1920s, the 40 Elephants reached the pinnacle of their success and notoriety. Miss Diamond instituted numerous clever tricks into the gang's arsenal, ensuring that all thieves were equipped with secret pockets and flaps in their gowns to facilitate shoplifting. They were also early adopters of automobiles, making their getaways in the most glamorous of models. They confounded police by handing off stolen goods to an unseen accomplice on foot before dashing off in a high-speed car chase. Police were left befuddled when they caught up with the car and found it devoid of any stolen goods. Cars also allowed the members to expand their operation outside of London to nearby towns. All the better once Miss Diamond and other faces became too well known to the local law enforcement agencies to go incognito. Ultimately, Miss Diamond was undone by her interesting fixation on controlling the gang. The Hoisters Code forbade members from doing anything against Miss Diamond's wishes, including marrying men she did not approve of. When a member defied her in 1925, Miss Diamond led the gang in a brutal attack against the newlyweds, so destructive that it became known as the Lambeth Riot. For her role as the instigator, Miss Diamond was sentenced to 18 months in prison. By the time she was freed, a new queen had taken over. Miss Diamond turned to a career of managing a brothel, while still offering advice to young aspiring thieves. One of her proteges, Shirley Pitts, was acknowledged the queen of the gang in the 1960s. Miss Pitt's operation was on a smaller scale than that of her mentor. Changing fashions made it harder to stow shoplifted loot inside clothing as stores increased security and surveillance. The 40 Elephants officially disbanded upon Miss Pitt's death in 1992, but membership and activity have been in decline for decades. By the time of Miss Pitt's passing, the 40 Elephants were a folk legend rather than the active threat. Yet the 40 Elephants remain one of the most successful and longest lasting criminal organisations in English history. While men gangs rose and fell around them, Miss Carr and Miss Diamond's ruthless efficiency and canny leadership allowed for their group to thrive. Miss Diamond's gang stormed into department stores so many times that the staff grew to recognise her and knew to keep watch. Ever flexible, she knew her own notoriety and, to her advantage, turned herself to distracting to a lesser known member to rob them unnoticed. Her mentorship grew in future generations of female thieves, providing both a role model and a route for lower class girls to achieve independence. Thank you for joining us today. What are your opinions on the 40 Elephants gang? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and share, and if you're new to the channel and want to see more Street Crime UK content, press subscribe and hit that bell so you can join us on the next video. Thank you for joining us.